with Marco Rubio and all these hawks being floated for Secretary of State under Donald Trump, like, I'm immensely concerned that if Iran is growing more desperate under a sanctions regime that I don't believe will let up under Donald Trump, it'll probably get worse. What does that mean for their aims and ambitions in the region? And could that actually draw the United States in even further into the Middle East militarily?
Well, I think there are three sources of concern when we look at the possibility, the risks of escalation in the Middle East that could pull the United States in, as you say. The first is this new position of weakness that Iran finds itself in. Its allies have crumbled. Its position is in full retreat. It has no alternative source of conventional deterrence. And this is going to put a lot of pressure on the regime to consider a nuclear deterrent as the only conceivable alternative to keep their position, not only their regional position, but also the position of the regime. The regime looks weak. And there is an active conversation, an active discussion inside Iran. Look at Libya. Look at Syria. Look what happened there. Now look at North Korea. What's the difference? And there's an increasing openness this year in 2024 to discussing the possibility of building a nuclear weapon. Even that discussion happening in public is notable. It did not occur in public before. So there is a real possibility that Iran moves to a bomb on the basis of its weakened position. The other two elements of concern, as you note, the makeup of the likely Trump national security team. Trump himself likes to talk about a deal with Iran. If I had to venture a guess, I would say that he looks on a deal as preferable to military action. He imagines himself a deal maker. He imagines himself as a bringer of peace. He also sees himself as someone who can come in and clean up Joe Biden's mess. And to some extent, Barack Obama's mess, right? He likes to imagine that a better deal is possible under him than was possible under Obama. That being said, every one of his appointees suggests to me that a return to maximum pressure is base case in 2025.
Yep.
In order to negotiate, you need a team. You need individuals who are willing to work towards that goal. And no one that Trump has selected has really suggested openly that they're even comfortable with the idea of negotiating with the Islamic Republic of Iran, except perhaps in a position of overwhelming strength. And this gets to our third source of potential concern, Israel. Israel is on a roll, let us say. It has issued blow after blow against Iran's allies.
Let's pull up this map really quickly, Greg. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to give people another visual aid here of what Israel has done over the past less than 2 weeks, as you say. There is the illegally occupied Golan Heights, which is internationally recognized as Syrian territory, but Israel has been in control of it and occupying it for decades. They have moved past. Apparently, the Golan Heights used to be the buffer zone for Israel between the terrorist hordes in Syria, and now they need a buffer zone for the buffer zone. You can see how they have taken even more territory over the past 2 weeks. That's just the context. And as you're saying, Gregory, they have also been bombing all of Syria's military sites during this process.
Right. So it does. It speaks to an Israeli position that is emboldened, that is confident. It's not only the campaign in Syria that we've seen play out over the last couple of days. It's the success of the war in Lebanon. I don't think it can really be sugarcoated that Israel has won a victory, perhaps not a complete victory, against Hezbollah in Lebanon. There was also the success of the strike against Iran in October, which feels like ancient history now because of so much has happened since. But Israel was able to do significant damage to Iran's military infrastructure in October and has suffered no retaliation as a result. So Iran looks weak, and this naturally gives Israel more of greater scope for undertaking more actions against Iran. That could potentially mean actions against its internal infrastructure, its military position. It could potentially mean an Israeli strike against the nuclear program that comes without direct U.S. involvement. Now, the scholarly consensus, the consensus in the analytical community, is that the U.S. has to be involved in order to drop bombs that are large enough to destroy the Iranian program. But we've seen Israel more willing to take risks. We've seen Israel more willing to strike against Iran from a position of strength. And that gives, I think, greater, increases the risks of an escalation in 2025 that could pull the United States in. If Israel feels that it has scope and opportunity to strike a blow against Iran, to remove what Israel regards as the existential threat of Iran's nuclear program, I think there's a chance that they'll go for it, knowing that Trump will likely have their back.
Yeah, and that is a terrifying prospect. It's it's a remarkable turn of events in the sense that Israel looked a lot weaker than it did, I would say, prior to the events over these past 3 to 4 weeks. First, the Lebanon ceasefire was a way, frankly, because they inflicted so much damage on the civilian population within Lebanon, they brought Hezbollah to the table and reached a deal with them without addressing the genocide in Gaza, which was why Hezbollah had started launching their rockets on October 8th, was in response to and in solidarity with Hamas and with the people in Gaza as well. And they were able to reach a deal with them without addressing that, without reaching a ceasefire in Gaza. And then now, with this turn of events, Assad, brutal, all of that as you described, but like another domino that falls where Hezbollah was severely weakened, and then Assad, another ally for Iran, now in Moscow.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're looking at Israel's position now versus what it was a few months ago, it is undoubtedly stronger. The goal of Israel against Hezbollah was the separation of the fronts, right? Reaching a conclusion or at least some kind of ceasefire or agreement on the northern border with Lebanon without having to conclude operations in Gaza or reach a ceasefire agreement with Hamas. And now that's been accomplished. And I think moving into 2025, the larger goal for Israel, and Netanyahu has said this, is to address the threat of Iran. Right? Consistently, we hear from Israel that the real problem, the real threat, is not Hezbollah, is not Hamas, but it is Iran. And given that they're likely to receive support from Trump in 2025, given that Iran looks very weak, given that Iran's conventional deterrence has been stripped away, that puts Israel in a pretty strong position to do what it's been doing so far: use military force to remove potential threats and strengthen its own position.
Lastly, before we let you go, the Turkey's role in this. They are a NATO ally, but there were reports earlier, I think maybe yesterday, that the U.S.-backed forces and Turkish forces had come into conflict with one another. Obviously, this presents an issue given that allegiance via NATO for Turkey and the United States. What does Erdogan want here, and does it present a potential conflict with the U.S.?
It's interesting. Before coming on, I saw a tweet from, I think, maybe the U.S. Spokesman, John Kirby, that said the United States is in contact with Turkey and is in contact with the SDF. And I thought that was interesting because currently Turkish proxies in Syria are fighting the SDF and pushing them back. This speaks to Turkey's position regarding the situation in Syria. What Turkey wants, what Erdogan wants, it's really three things. The first is some kind of new political status quo in Syria that permits the return of Syrian refugees. There are something like 3 million Syrian refugees in Turkey, and Erdogan wants them to return to Syria. That is one of his priorities. So establishing some kind of normalization with whatever government emerges in Damascus is a goal for him. I think the more important, though, and more immediate goals are addressing the security threat that Turkey feels is posed by the existence of the SDF across the border in Syria. There are, of course, Kurdish groups, Kurdish factions that are operating in Turkey that the Turkish government perceives as being a threat to Turkish security. The SDF being present in Syria has long been regarded by Turkey as a threat to Turkish security. Turkey is using its groups, its proxies, its allies in Syria, the Syrian National Army, to push back against the SDF. And in the event that the U.S. withdraws, as I mentioned, Turkey is likely to push even harder against the SDF to try to force them into some kind of new arrangement, some kind of new status quo that reduces their autonomy, that reduces their military strength, that forces them into a coalition with whatever government is present in Damascus. That would accomplish Erdogan's goals. And right now, he seems to be on track of accomplishing them. It's a little hard to pick clear winners. I mean, as I mentioned, there are clear losers. But if I had to pick a clear winner from what's happened in Syria over the last 2 weeks, it is Turkey and Erdogan. He appears to be in line, on track to accomplish what he wants to accomplish in Syria.
Well, really appreciate your analysis and your time today. Gregory Brew, a senior analyst at Eurasia Group, focusing on Iran and energy. Really appreciate you coming on today. Thanks so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.